This is a video which is designed to assist students in catching up on a missed tutorial for Religion and Society Units 3 and 4. It's all about stances. So stances is one of the most important parts of our sequence of addressing challenges. We go challenge, stance, and response. And so it's really important to understand what a stance is and be able to execute stances on your Saxon exam very carefully. The VCAA provides a definition which is fairly boring. It says a stance is a principled perspective. And it doesn't tell us much about what a stance actually is. The words principled and perspective give us a deeper clue into what we should be discussing. We should be talking about the way in which a tradition sees a challenge. That's what perspective means. And we should be looking at why a tradition sees that based on the principled part of principled perspective. One really thing to note is that stances are thoughts, not actions. If you talk about what a tradition does when a challenge happens, you will be wrong. If you talk about what a challenge thinks about a challenge, you are more likely to be right. If on a SAC you are asked to define a stance and you provide the line, a stance is a principled perspective, you will be marked wrong. That is not enough to tell us what a stance actually is. That's the VCAA definition of a stance, but it's not enough to tell your assessor that you know exactly what a stance is. That means that you can read and regurgitate on a page. You need to say something which talks about the tradition's ideas, thoughts, opinions regarding a challenge, and you need to tell us that it has to be based on something. Typically, they're based on beliefs, ethics, teachings, social structure, could be rituals, could be symbols. Using aspects is really helpful in that process. Now, you're not allowed to discuss things that a tradition actually does in a stance question. If you say that a tradition decided to write letters, that's a response. If you say that a tradition decided to send out people to be involved in public debates, that's a response. In order to stop that from happening, there are a series of words that you could write down or a series of styles of words that you could use to try and assist your discussion. So stance words are all thinking words. They're words that tell us what a tradition thinks about a problem, their opinion on a problem, the way in which they see a problem. So use verbs that try and communicate that thinking, judging sort of idea. To respond to a challenge, use different kinds of verbs, words that tell us that a tradition is actually doing something material or that they are moving or acting in some way. By splitting up these sets of words, you're more likely to aim your stance response at the question at hand instead of accidentally walk into a response answer. So, here's a chance for you to pause the video and come up with 3 more examples of stance thinking words that you could use. Maybe you choose to go online and check out thesaurus resources online and type in the word think or judge and see what you come up with. Write down 3 new words that you could use to communicate an opinion or a perspective. So let's talk stance formula. There is no one single formula for how to communicate a stance, but this might be a way to assist you in getting started. What's most important in a stance question when you're answering them is that you describe the tradition's opinion or perspective. If you don't do that, you haven't done anything of value in the question. The next thing to do is to tell us why a tradition sees that as being the reason why they take that perspective. What is the basis of that? And if you can put an aspect in your answer somewhere, you'll be doing really well. Here's an example of one that would score quite well on a Saccharin exam. A religious tradition may conclude that a new interpretation of text is unorthodox based on the previous authoritative teachings of a past wise leader in the social structure. Let's look at the parts. Here's the description of the opinion. The new interpretation of a text is unorthodox. Here's where it comes from, authoritative teachings of a past wise leader. There's the reason why they think it's unorthodox because of what people have said in the past. And that comes out of the social structure, which we add in there just to increase our answer and to really show assessor that we know what we're talking about. Here's a challenge for you. Here are 3 stances. One of them is worth a mark today, one of them is not worth a mark today, and one of them is almost worth a mark if we changed 1 or 2 things in it. Pause the video, have a read of these 3, and decide which one you think is worth a mark, which one you think is not worth a mark, and which one is almost worth a mark with a little bit of a change. Now that you've paused the video and you've had a go at reading it yourself, let's have a look at which one we think is definitely worth a mark. The bottom one is absolutely worth a mark. So it is very clear about the rituals being inappropriate and needing to be restricted, and it tells us why, because they're not found in the foundational texts. Which one did you say was not worth a mark? It's the middle one. Okay. The reason why it's not worth a mark is the person who's written it dives straight into a response. They say a religious tradition may write an official letter. Well, that's a response, not a stance. And the top one is almost worth a mark. So the reason why it's not quite there is they didn't exactly describe what the tradition's stance on materialism is. So they could say something like, materialism should be rejected, and that'd get them over the line. Here's another set of 3 more complicated ones. Again, pause the video, have a read through these and decide which one you think is worth a mark, which one is not worth a mark, and which one is nearly worth a mark. Now that you've paused the video and you've had a go yourself, let's have a look at what we think. The one that's definitely worth a mark is the top one. It's very clear about the challenge, scientific discovery. It's very clear about the fact that the science needs to be embraced, and it gives a good reason about the text about creation being read allegorically. The one that's not worth a mark is the bottom one. They don't say much about what the tradition's actual opinion is. They say things like, hold an election to end future disputes and find a leader and that sort of stuff. So it's not really telling an actual perspective. The one that's not quite there is the middle one. It's good. It tells us about what the opinion would be, but it doesn't tell us why that opinion is the way it is. So they could add something like ethical principles to a system. But what are you going to say for a stance in particular? Here's an example of a specific stance towards the change of law to permit abortion in Victoria, which is well established. So here's the parts. The change of law to permit abortion in Victoria is the challenge. Here's the church's position. It's atrocious. Atrocious meaning bad, evil. And why? Because we have in the Catechism a text which says quite clearly the moral evil of every procured abortion. Frequently, questions on Saxon exams are not going to be single mark questions about stances. There might be multiple marks. So your task is then to add more in another sentence to develop the stance further. Here's a sentence starter for you. They also base their rejection of the law on something. Pause the video, have a look through your notes, or look online, look through the catechism, find another reason why the tradition would reject the change of law to permit abortion in Victoria, and write it in this space. Have your answer checked by your friend and checked by one of your teachers. Okay, and finally, just to see if we can put it all together in a specific context, which of these 3 specific stances is going to be awarded a mark, which of them is not going to be awarded a mark, and which of them might be awarded a mark if there's a slight change to it. Pause the video, have a read through, and decide for yourself which is getting a mark, which won't be getting a mark, which might be getting a mark. Now that you've paused the video, let's have a look at what we think. In terms of the stance which is going to get a mark, we'd say the middle one is definitely going to get a mark. It's very clear about the Black Plague. It tells us that the tradition saw the plague as being a call to repentance, and it gave us a bit of evidence because Clement stated that it was a mysterious decree of God. In this case, because it's not about Clement writing a letter, it's about the church's position that it is a call to repentance. The letter is just extra evidence for us. The one that's not going to get a mark is the top one. It talks about Christians holding a stance, but doesn't say what that is, and that they became martyrs of their faith, refusing to submit to the emperor. It's not really a stance, just telling us what they did. And the one that's almost there is the bottom one. it's close. It tells us that the tradition rejected the teachings that rejected the teaching that he was subordinate to the Father, but it didn't tell us why. So you could add something as simple as a quote from the Gospel of John, "The Father and I are one," or other ones such as "Before Abraham was, I am," or even from the start of John in the prologue, "And the Word was God."